Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into this Israel-Hezbollah conflict, and you guys have sent in a ton of articles. We're talking targeted strikes, civilian casualties, everything. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a rapidly changing situation. And we're going to examine these events, really trying to understand the perspectives of those caught in the middle, unpack all these complexities, see where it might be headed, hopefully leave you with some things to think about.
So let's get right into it. One thing that really stood out to me, Israel's bombing banks now
Hmm,
in Beirut. That feels like a whole new level.
it really might be. This bank, Al-Qard al-Hassan, is considered really central to Hezbollah's finances. Not just about hitting them in the wallet, though. Disrupting their ability to fund everything, even social services, potentially cripples their operations on multiple levels.
Wow, long-term implications there. But then we're also seeing conflicting stories, like that incident with the Sahel hospital. Israel saying Hezbollah bunker underneath, but journalists aren't finding proof.
Exactly. That whole situation at the Sahel hospital really shows the fog of war, especially with how information's used now. Israel saying there's a bunker, tweeting directions, but journalists invited by the IDF themselves can't find it. Makes you wonder who's controlling the story here and what it means for civilians when the information's so contradictory.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing. And speaking of changing information, this alleged leak of U.S. intelligence potentially revealing Israel's plans for Iran, the FBI investigating that now.
Right, and that just adds another layer to all of this. We have the IRGC commander, so that's Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, downplaying the chance of major Israeli retaliation. But then Hezbollah comes out claiming responsibility for the drone attack on Netanyahu's home. Just a lot of claims and counterclaims, hard to figure out the real intentions and what the fallout might be.
Like everyone's playing some high-stakes chess game and we're just trying to keep up. But in all this, can't forget about the human cost. Gaza and Lebanon, it's devastating. The numbers are unbelievable.
It's crucial to remember there are real people behind all of this. Over 100,000 Palestinians injured in Gaza since October. To put that in perspective, roughly 1 out of every 22 people.
1 in 22. Hard to wrap your head around that. And northern Gaza, areas like Bet Lahia, Jabalia, Beit Hanun, they're facing a full-on humanitarian crisis on top of the conflict. Lack of food, water, medical supplies, dire.
And we can't forget the Israeli strike near Lebanon's largest public hospital, Rafik Hariri University Hospital. The deaths, the damage to the hospital itself, severely impacting their ability to help people.
Especially with the hospital director saying they were operating at full capacity when it hit. Not an empty building. This was a lifeline, and now it's crippled. Shows the impact all this is having on essential services.
And yeah, it goes beyond just the physical damage, too. Think about what it does to people psychologically. Patients, the staff, families that rely on that hospital, it's going to have lasting effects.
It's just awful. And CNN's analysis saying the strike location, it wasn't even within the IDF's own evacuation zones, makes you question how precise these strikes really are. Were they doing everything they could to protect civilians? Tough to say.
It really is. And all of this is happening with these existing geopolitical tensions as the backdrop. Like the U.S. intelligence community, they've raised concerns about the upcoming U.S. elections, saying Russia, China, Iran, they're all trying to interfere, influence the outcome.
So on top of everything else, this conflict could get even more complicated with other countries trying to pull strings during a U.S. election year.
It's definitely something to keep in mind. It shows how connected everything is globally, how fast things can escalate. Speaking of connections, what about Secretary Blinken's visit to Israel? Over 2 hours with Netanyahu. That has to mean something.
Yeah, felt like a big deal with everything else going on. Like, okay, at least someone's talking. Did Blinken meet with anyone else while he was there?
He met with Ron Dermer, too, key Netanyahu ally. Shows the U.S. is serious about navigating this whole thing diplomatically. Those efforts, they're important even if it doesn't feel like it with all the violence. It's a glimmer of hope, maybe a path to actually resolving this.
We need some hope right now. You know, going back to something you said earlier about the different sides of the story, you've got Israeli officials saying Hezbollah used that drone on Netanyahu's place, which Hezbollah is claiming now. But at first, Iran denied any involvement, then almost confirming Hezbollah was behind it. It's like no one wants to take the blame.
Shows how many layers there are here, different groups, different goals. Sometimes those goals are going to clash. Remember that alleged leak about Israel's plans for Iran? Trying to unravel this whole thing gets even harder with stuff like that floating around.
It's like a puzzle where someone keeps switching out the pieces, and we're stuck trying to figure out the picture.
And while we're doing that, the conflict keeps escalating. The human cost, it just keeps getting worse.
Easy to get caught up in the politics, the military strategy, But we can't forget about the people in the middle of all of this. Families torn apart, kids living in fear, the doctors and nurses working tirelessly in impossible situations.
You're right. Important to remember. Behind all the headlines, the politics, there are real people going through unimaginable things.
Yeah, just heartbreaking. And sometimes it feels like we're getting so much information thrown at us, conflicting reports, who's on what side, even talk about spies. Easy to forget there are actual people at the center of this whole thing, and their lives are falling apart.
It's true, and that's what matters most. It's not just some side story, the human cost, it's the main thing. Those images from Gaza and Lebanon, families in whatever shelter they can find, hospitals overrun, never knowing when the next airstrike's coming. That's the reality.
We hear these terms, humanitarian crisis, civilian casualties, but for the people living through it, what does that actually look like?
Imagine having to make these impossible choices every day. Do you stay in your house, knowing it could be a target? Or do you leave everything behind, become another refugee, trying to find some kind of safety, some way to survive? What about your kids? Do you risk sending them to a hospital that might be in the line of fire? These are the decisions people are facing through no fault of their own.
All while the rest of the world tries to understand this mess of global politics and competing narratives feels almost impossible, honestly, even when we're just trying to follow along.
It is a lot, and that's why it's so important to talk about it, keep digging for answers, even when it feels chaotic. We only start finding solutions by understanding the problems.
And never forgetting about the people at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. Finding peace, it seems a long way off right now. But we have to start by recognizing how much this conflict is costing people in ways we can't even imagine.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Hezbollah's finances, international relations, trying to understand the information war. And it's obvious this is far from over. Only thing that seems certain is that nothing's certain.
That's true. But if you take away one thing for this, I hope it's to stay informed, ask questions, and get different perspectives. Don't just take the headlines at face value. Really think critically about what you're hearing. And never forget, there are human lives woven into every part of this conflict.
Every headline, every statistic, it's someone's life changed forever. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and let's all hope for a more peaceful future.